Champlain audiocast test.
Good morning. Thank you for coming out to Transportation Committee meeting this morning. We have quorum, so we'll proceed. And we have no regrets. We never have regrets at Transportation Committee. That was last term. So no declarations of interest. Could we confirm the minutes of the 20th of April 2015, please?
Carried.
Thank you. We have a response to inquiries, Greenbank Road project issues. We sent notice out earlier this week, and Vice Chairman Kennedy will be putting forward the following technical amendment. I'm going to ask her to introduce the amendment at this time, and we can deal with it and vote on it right now.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, a technical amendment to list response to Council Inquiry 06-15, whereas response to Council Inquiry 06-15, Greenbank Road project issues was inadvertently left off of the May 6, 2015 Transportation Committee agenda due to staff error, and whereas the Ward Councillor has been informed by staff that this response would be listed on the May 6, 2015 Transportation Committee agenda, and then on the May 13th, 2015 City Council agenda, therefore be it resolved that Transportation Committee approve that the response to Council Inquiry 06-15 Greenbank Road project issues be listed under communications on the Transportation Committee agenda of the 6th of May 2015.
Thank you. Carried? Carried. Thank you. We'll run through the agenda. Please indicate if there's any matters that you'd like to held. First, we have the Little Italy local area parking study, and we do have a staff presentation on that, so we'll hold that one. Second on the agenda is 2014 Parking Services Branch Annual Report. Received?
I have a couple of questions on that.
Okay, we'll hold that one. Number 3, 2015 Parking Services Branch Business Plan. Received?
Well, it's one or the other. I'm sorry.
Okay, we'll hold both until Councillor Fleury figures out which one he wants to speak to. Number 4, Fleet Business Improvements. Carried? Okay. And now we'll go back to Councillor Fleury. We'll go back to item number 1, which is the Little Italy local area parking study. If staff could come up and start the presentation. Thank you.
Yeah, it's both.
Good morning.
Good morning, Kevin. Scott. Scott, are you leading the presentation?
Yeah, I would just, I thought I'd introduce Scott Caldwell, who's Program Manager, Parking Studies. And to Scott's left is Lindsay Thomas. She's a Project Coordinator for Parking. So Scott will be providing the update today.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you, Chair Aguilar. So our purpose today is to, I just want to give you a quick overview of the Little Italy local area parking study. We're going to run through basically just the process and ultimately the outcomes that came about as a result. Next. So just a little bit of background. In 2009, Council approved the municipal parking management strategy. And what this did was this provided a number of clear objectives for the municipal parking management program. What it also did was it provided the tools and mechanisms by which we ensure that those objectives are being met. One of the key mechanisms that we have is the local area parking study. So this involves a comprehensive review of a specific area. And we look at a number of things. There's a lot of inputs that go into it, not just parking data, but we look at forecasting data, we look at enforcement data. Consultation is a key part as well. We account for all key stakeholders in the area, from the BIAs to the community associations to places of worship. And what we do is we assess and we apply what we refer to as a parking toolbox, which considers a wide range of potential solutions to ultimately better manage parking. And that includes tools around improving accessibility to parking, supply of parking, as well as focusing on alternate modes of transportation. So to this point, we've done approximately 7 full studies. In 2014, we had identified that the time was right to get into Little Italy. We had the Preston BIA and the Dalhousie Community Association on side, identifying that there were things that we needed to look at. We had last looked at it in 1995, so there was a need for updated data. And there was an alignment with other studies that were ongoing. Notably those that are listed there. Of note is that the Gladstone CDP is currently pending. So we included it as part of the 2014 work plan for parking services and went ahead with it. So just a quick look at the process involved. One of the key themes that occurs throughout here is the consultation that occurred. So at the outset, we did our inventory, we set everything up, but we also engaged the community, drew feedback, got input at that point to help set the context for the study. We did our data collection, again more consultation through our face-to-face surveys on the street, and that's when we did our counts and we got the snapshot data from the field. We took all that away, conducted our evaluation. And ultimately came back for additional consultation early this year through a public open house, and we circulated the study report through key stakeholders. We've finalized the study through our recommendations and outcomes, and we're here now. So a quick look at what we found. And this is primarily focused on what the data told us from the area. Both in characteristic and from the data, we identified 3 zones which were fairly unique and stood on their own. We had the north of the highway, so it's a fairly large area, but by and large there was adequate parking supply throughout. We target an 85% threshold, whereby if we're in and around that and just below that, we're okay. There's a good balance, and we found that throughout the area north of the highway. There were some localized issues, some resident concerns with illegal parking and some safety concerns. We've tried to address that, and we've referred those appropriately. Marked in yellow. Sorry, I'm talking about the area north of the highway in yellow. So we've referred those to staff, and we are following up on those. Our focus, I'll move over to the green actually, which is east of Rochester, and that's really the opposite. That's on the low end where we see really low utilization, and so that's Rochester Street and east into what are federal buildings in that sector. What we see there is very low demand. So whereas we're around 50 to 85% in the yellow area, we're well under 50% utilized on street in that green area. Moving over, our focus really coming out of the study, where we knew we needed to pay attention and develop some strategies, was in the pink area, which is right around Preston Street, south of the highway and west of Rochester. We exceed that practical capacity number, which is 85% utilized at many times, and we even get over 100%, over maximum capacity when we get into the evening times. So parking is really the premium in that area, and there's a high degree of demand. Next. So just to summarize the key issues, and these are the key issues that came about as a result of both the data collection and the analysis, as well as the consultation. We did identify that, as I've noted, there is a lack of available on-street parking south of the Queensway and west of Rochester, so right in that corridor around Preston Street. At the same time, we've got significant development occurring and are planned in the same area. There are off-street facilities. We've got one city-managed slot, which is just north of the highway, but in close proximity to that concern area. And then there's a couple of private lots, notably Preston Square, and there's a large service lot in between Beach and Aberdeen. Those are underutilized. We found that during the day they were fairly well utilized, but when we get into the off-peak times, so the evenings, the Saturdays, those are by and large, there's lots of room there. So we identified that as an opportunity to try to leverage. As noted, there are some local issues where residents have problems with illegal parking, safety concerns that result from that, encroachment on driveways and on sidewalks and what have you. So we did flag those, and then we also look at bike parking, and we did note so there were some gaps in available bike parking, notably on Rochester and Preston and Beach, I believe. So a quick summary of the outcomes. We had 11 recommendations within the study report. The key ones here are, and these are the strategies that we're looking at, and again the focus is on that area south of the highway, the pink area from the map previous. We want, what we are looking to do is draw the demand for parking out a little bit and create opportunities, incentivize people to park a little farther away. For Rochester to be empty when Beach and Aberdeen and Preston Street are full, for that extra half block, what we're looking to do is reduce the rates. Currently they're at $3 an hour on street. By reducing the rates, cutting them in half to $1.50 an hour, we're hoping to draw some of that demand out and alleviate the pressure to a certain extent on the critical area. Also looking to reduce rates at our city-managed lot at 301 Preston Street, which is immediately north of the highway. We've reducing rates aggressively, specifically in the evening and on the weekends. Talk about the installation of additional post and ring bike racks. So again, Preston, Beach, and Rochester, where we've identified gaps. And then we've also identified that we need to prioritize the pursuit of opportunities to increase the parking supply. So this could be through the development of a new facility or partnering with a developer to add a couple floors of publicly available parking when that opportunity arises. Thanks. A couple other things. There is a zoning bylaw review that's just been started up, and this is looking at the parking requirements. So we've kind of engaged planning on that, and they've agreed to look at these two things as part of that. And the first is a requirement for car sharing as part of the parking requirements associated with new developments, and some logistics we'll have to work through there, and that'll be part of their process to work through that, and we'll work with them. But also the notion of unbundling parking or providing parking, public parking in a more accessible way on the part of developers. What unbundling means is that if there's if a developer provides a certain amount of residential spaces, we want to loosen the restrictions that are on them to, if they don't sell all of those spaces, as an example, to make some of those publicly available. Currently, there's quite a process involved with that. And then just to wrap up, we also identifying that we're looking at that area south of the highway as a major problem area right now. There is development that's going to occur north of the highway, so we've got to keep an eye on things, and we're not going to just walk away from the area. We're going to make sure we keep an eye on things to identify issues as they arise going forward. Good. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions? I'm going to start off, if that's okay, and then, I just curious about the underutilized lots. I see you're taking steps to get more people to use them, but any ideas as to why, other than price seems reasonable, even before the proposed reduction. So do you have any sense as to why people are choosing not to use the lots?
Ultimately, what we find is that the convenience plays the predominant role and it plays a predominant role in how people select where they're going to park. And what we find specifically, and I'll focus in on the city-managed lot, like I said, we've been aggressive with the pricing reductions. We're trying to find that balance at which it's incentivized to the point that people will forego a little bit of convenience to park in the lot. But anecdotally, we charge a little bit less off-street in that lot than on-street, and the on-street will fill up before the facility. And it's that my belief is that people will more readily circle the block trying to find that spot that they can pull in and pull out of rather than seeking out those alternatives. So, but I believe that there is a price point at which that will at least alleviate that demand or swing it a little bit the other way, and we're trying to find that.
And the reductions that you're proposing, assuming this report is received, carried, how quickly are those reductions go into effect?
We actually, we've identified those reductions as part of a regular off-street rate review process that we do. So we have the concurrence that we require, and it's something we can do under delegated authority. So the ball's already rolling on that, and we'll likely have the off-street rates at least in place likely within a month and a half. The on-street rates on Rochester and East may take a little longer, just because there's a few more logistics that we need to work through, and we need to figure out how we're going to promote that and make that something that's more visible to people and people can identify with.
So the message is, for the peak summertime on Preston Street, parking rates will be better.
Yes.
People want to go out and avail themselves of the restaurants and other attractions.
That's what we'll be aiming for, yes.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor McKinney.
Thank you, Chair. And I do want to thank staff for the job that you did on this. I know that the BIA and they actually are not even here to speak to it. So I know that you consulted very well with them. They're happy with the recommendations that you're making, and as am I, especially around recognizing that we should be asking developers to, put in the required bike parking. There's people, it's one thing to, build more parking and hoping people will come, but, I would rather see people travel to Preston Street by different modes, and we're doing things as a city to make that happen. We have a good multi-use pathway that's now running along the Trillium line that makes getting there better. We're extending that past Carling. So, bike parking, certainly the floating spots for developers, I think, is important. I've never understood why anyone should own, a 3 feet by 5 foot piece of concrete 2 stories down in the ground. So to have those floating spots and the car share certainly is important. But I think 2 other things. I'd certainly like to see us looking at visitor bike parking as well. I think that if you're with the new condominiums that are going up, all of the development at the south end of Preston at Carling, I think that if you want people to come down and visit you, and they're going to travel by bike or they're going to travel by LRT and with their bike, to have visitor bike parking. But I think even the most important thing here too is planning growth management. I just wonder, my question to them is, as we allow development to happen at such high density, and we don't impose the zoning requirements for visitor parking, it seems to me that as we start to eliminate the amount of required visitor parking by the hundreds, we're going to end up building parking garages for what should have been visitor parking. Because what happens with visitor parking, when new developments don't put in place the required number of visitor parking, 2 things happen. One is the local businesses don't have space for their customers to park. And the other is it encroaches on existing developments and existing neighborhoods. And, you know, we see it time and time again where, you know, the required visitor parking is so much, they ask for a lower amount, and we allow that. So I think that that's part of the problem here, and I also see that as a big problem as we move forward and intensify the downtown. So if I could just ask for your opinion on that, and you know how you would suggest we move forward to make sure that that at least the visitor parking requirement is met.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As you know, in the area of Carling and Preston, we've recently done a secondary plan, and it's really a development direction for a complete community. Which of course involves high-intensity residential development in the form of condominiums, some up to 55 stories in height. A couple thousand units have been approved. But as I mentioned, what we're trying to do is create this complete community that is focused on alternative modes of transportation. It's very compact, it's very dense. There's pathways. There's a new, for example, there's a new Hickory Street pedestrian bridge that's being constructed. There's a large patio areas, pathways, connectivity. It's a form of development where we try to have alternative or promote, as I said, alternative modes of transportation. It's right beside the Trillium line. So there's opportunity to take the train, and it leads up to LRT as well, and buses in the surrounding area. So by creating this complete and compact, dense community, we really, and no pun intended, but we put the car in the back seat. So we have alternatives to taking the car. Now, when people come to visit, and we're speaking specifically to visitor parking, someone might go visit a friend from one condominium to the other, so they walk or take the Hickory Street Bridge, cycling. There's other alternatives to taking vehicles. We find that the idea is that because of the safety and the convenience of these alternatives, as I said, the car is not the most important means of transportation, even for visiting, because people can walk, as I said, from one condo to the other or take the O train to visit. What we have found in terms of higher density developments that you do have to do, doesn't mean to say that you shouldn't provide any visitor parking. Parking that's provided at a rate of about 8.3% as a minimum for high-density developments is sufficient to have enough parking on site, because not everyone comes to use that parking when they do use it at the same time. There's turnover. It's short-term parking. They're able to share those spaces. So if you have about 8.3% as a minimum in high-density type developments, there's sufficient parking on site so it doesn't cause an impact or an adverse impact on the surrounding streets.
But I guess, you know, I agree. I don't mind putting the cars in the back seat, and I think that we should be promoting, you know, people walking and cycling to get, you know, into these mixed-use communities. But when we don't provide the required visitor parking, you know, we saw it last week with a new development, an application for new development where, you know, there was I think it was like 18 less visitor spots than are required that the developer was asking for, but more residential than what they needed. So again, I do agree with you that, you know, we need to make sure that we're promoting different modes, but, you know, I think that on one hand, we're talking about building new parking structures, and on the other hand, we're not always providing the number of visitor parking that is required. And visitor parking, again, is flexible, right? It can be used for commercial parking, can be used for visitor parking. So, you know, and I would rather see us make sure that that's in place in new developments before we move to, you know, building any new structure. And just on the just a quick comment on the Booth Street complex. It's very interesting how psychology works once you get behind a wheel, because about 2 weeks ago, I was driving down Preston. We were going to go out for dinner, and we were going to a restaurant which is just on the south side of the Queensway overpass. And I looked for parking for about 5 minutes and found it just on the other side. And I know full well that there's a parking lot just on the north side and it's empty. And it never occurred to me to go there. And it's for an underpass. It's actually not a bad underpass. It's well lit. So there is a psychology to parking. People want to be close to where they're going. So, you know, having the Booth Street complex with lower rates, you know, I'm not sure that will take away the demand for parking on street. So again, I go back to, I'm glad to see the other recommendations you're making here for more post and ring and encouraging different ways of moving through that neighborhood. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Nussbaum.
Thank you, Chair. I just had a question with regard to the report, but before I get to the question, I guess the premise that I interpret in terms of why we have paid parking in the urban core, two of the policy objectives are, one, a revenue source for the city, and two is to discourage people from driving. We know from the Transportation Master Plan that it's the most expensive form, 70 cents a person kilometer versus 15 cents for cycling and 20 cents for walking. And so I guess, although I sort of understand the rationale for lowering parking rates, it has to be said that, in fact, lowering parking rates is sending a signal that seems to be very much in the wrong direction of those two policy objectives, right, in terms of a revenue source and ultimately discourage people from driving, especially given that Preston is very close to a multi-billion-dollar investment in the LRT, and I guess the new station at Gladstone. Preston Street was just rejuvenated, making it more pleasant for a pedestrian experience. So I guess the concern I have is, although I understand the motivation of getting people into the municipal lot, are we sending the wrong signal to our residents that, in fact, we're encouraging exactly the mode that we don't want people to use for very good economic reasons by saying parking is cheaper? And so I guess my question is, you chose in this case to lower the fee. That's going to ultimately increase the demand in the long term, especially given Councillor McKenney's observations that there's a lot of growth happening in that area. So did you look instead, if the problem is that too many people are parking on the residential side streets, did you consider, or did the consultant consider, ways of limiting the side street parking using residential permits? I mean, there's lots of interesting and innovative ways of making sure that residents have access to their own side streets for visitors by using a visitor parking system, instead of the approach you took, which was to lower the parking fees. So I'm just curious to what extent you looked at constraining the supply instead of ultimately increasing the demand.
Chair, I'll start off just maybe by a quick clarification as far as what the objectives of the program. And our primary objective, one of our key objectives, is to promote short-term parking in support of businesses. And to that end, we aim for this 85% utilization, what we refer to as practical capacity. So, and that's that balance between optimizing the facility, so ensuring that the facility, whether it be on-street or off-street, isn't empty or close to being empty, but that it's not overutilized so that it's, there's accessible parking for the next person coming through. And then alongside that objective, we do focus on alternative modes of transportation and reconciling resident issues associated with parking generators. So in this case, I think that kind of segues to your question, which is in relation to the residential streets where there's not paid parking, and there's a few of those south of the highway. The permit option is an option. I know that there are resident concerns on Pamela and on Norman and some of the other streets. There is a process whereby the residents can drive that process to achieve consensus to implement a permit zone. And I know that's been explored, and I know parking regulation changes have been explored and through traffic services, but there has been no, I guess, consensus to this point to make those changes to affect that type, like a permit zone on those types of streets.
Okay. So as part, isn't there an overall residential parking review going on citywide?
Of the
Yes, there is part of the bylaw review. It'll be included in that.
Okay. And so in this case, if you see in a few years that demand increases, especially once the developments are in place and the increased buildings on the north side, are you anticipating a review of the parking fee reduction, or do you see this as a short-term solution?
Through the chair, we are always looking at finding that balance. So I think part of our monitoring that we will undertake and we've committed to through this study is to look at the entire area to determine, are we meeting our objectives? Are the changes that we're putting into place here meeting the objectives of the program? So we will be keeping a close eye on that going forward.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Fleury.
I think, the report highlights sort of the reality of the issue in my mind, but I think the complexity, and it's highlighted by the last speaker, is really, by my colleague, is really our ability to react to different demands. What I find is that, at this committee, we've talked about Westboro as an example, and then by the time we come back to committee, getting those approvals, it's so lengthy that the reality on street changes, because at any given time, the business needs or the reality of a residential zone or a main street continue to change. So I wonder if through this the process can be reviewed to enable, if we agree with the policy and the direction that, when you reach an 85% usage or capacity or whatever, that the rates are modified. We all agree to that. I wonder why it's not implemented in the program that fees can vary within a certain threshold. And I think that's part of the frustration of this, perhaps not specific to Preston, but overall on our main street. And I'd love to hear what we can do beyond that policy direction to enable you to just react to the ongoing demands on those streets.
Thank you. Through the chair, we actually are in the midst of an exercise right now, and this comes out of a previous committee direction, which was associated with the Glebe local area parking study, to undertake what was termed, what we've kind of termed an on-street rate review. In different municipalities across North America, there's different approaches. There's a spectrum which from fixed rate all the way to this performance-based pricing model. A city like San Francisco does this, where they actually change rates on a persistent basis relative to demand, and they've used real-time data, real-time information to do this. So we're looking to progress in that sense and have something in place, and my hope is that it'll be before this committee, if not later this year, then early next year, to instill that, to your point, in the program to make it more responsive.
I'm glad to hear that. And I think that it's hard to speak street per street, because then you have a given BIA or a given business or a given resident that comes up. But if we have a city-wide objective out of the on-street parking fees or rates and targets, then it's clear it applies fairly and equally to all regions of the city, and that is a lot easier for us at committee to say, no, you know what, if there's an issue, we change the overall policy, but we're not going to work on street-specific initiatives, because the goals are equal, and the revenue share and demands, when you move one, it impacts another zone. So, I'm favor to that. What I think we'd love to probably see at committee, and we'll leave it with the chair, is really to make sure that the threshold and the period of changes are reflected in that overall policy.
Thank you, Councillor Fleury. Any other questions for staff? Yes, Councillor Kakish.
Thanks, Chair. Just a follow-up question to, I guess, what Councillor Nussbaum was touching upon. And in addition to the revenue, one of the other things we look at is the turnover rates in terms of the parking spots. So with this change, are there any concerns about the vehicles being parked there longer than they are, because finding that magic number is partially to have that turnover rate so that businesses benefit from that as well. I know BIAs in the past have been here as delegations to speak about that issue. So how does this proposal impact the turnover rates, and how are the turnover rates right now?
Through the chair. My understanding would be that you're speaking of the rate reductions on Rochester Street and the on-street specifically. With the level of occupancy and the usage that we're seeing on Rochester, we're well under 50%, so it's not being used in the first place. So our first objective is to make that accessible, make that convenient, draw people in there. The regulations are going to in part dictate that turnover, right? And that's another tool. We have the rate, which will help motivate people to turn over, but also the regulations that are in place. I don't have the turnover numbers as far as Rochester goes available, but it would be part of the monitoring that we do to see what is the impact. We haven't undertaken this type of rate review, so it's going to be, especially going into this on-street rate review that we're pursuing, it's going to be a good experience for us to see what that price elasticity is in this type of area in Ottawa. So we'll be monitoring all that.
I guess the other point too is, as a follow-up to what Councillor Fleury was mentioning, that we have the flexibility to come back, and this is not sort of set in stone. If the changes don't work, that we're back here and we can change those rates if they're not working in the north or the south side or whichever parts of the study.
Yeah, so through the chair, we actually do have, and I'll make reference to the off-street rate review. When we do that 3 times a year, we look at all the rates. We have 19 or so off-street facilities, municipally managed off-street facilities, and 3 times a year we go in and we look at the occupancy and we look at are we meeting our objectives? And we actually, as we do on-street, we have the ability to go in and make those changes under delegated authority to hit our target, with the objective to hit our targets, and ensure that there's a balance between the facilities being used and then not being over utilized, right? So there is available parking. So the short answer is yes, we do off-street, and we will, as part of this on-street rate review, develop that policy to do it on-street as well. And it's something that we can be very reactive on and do under delegated authority. So we have the flexibility we need there.
Okay. Thanks. And the last question, and I apologize if I missed this during the presentation, but on the side streets, are we making any changes there along any of the side streets as part of this study, or are we keeping everything status quo?
Through the chair, everything's status quo. We will be referring a couple of items, concerns that were raised to traffic services when they dealing with the parking regulations, and enforcement as well was something that came up. So we'll be referring there and working with those groups to determine if any solutions, but there's no hard recommendations that we've identified in the study.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Seeing no further questions, carried? Sorry, received? Okay, thank you. Now we're back to Councillor Fleury to tell us whether he's held number 2 or number 3 or both.
I've held both for one question each, Mr. Chair.
Okay, well, let's start with number 2 then.
So in the annual parking revenue report, there's a reflection of rates being influenced by the above average fees at Dalhousie and Clarence. My understanding is that both were reviewed. One is increased, the other one is significantly decreased. Does it apply to the bump in average, or is that just a typo?
Sorry, through the chair, if my understanding is correct, the question related to the decrease in fees in lot 5, which is the Dalhousie lot, and the relative to Lot 4. And what we found there, this is part of the 3 times a year we go in and look at all of our off-street lots. What we found was that the utilization was quite low, or not quite low, but it was definitely lower than what we'd like to see. So this is about optimizing the facility and trying to get as many people through there. It also dovetails with what we've done with our parking guidance system. So at both Lot 4, which is about Market, and Lot 5, Dalhousie, we've implemented exterior signs which illustrate how many spots are available and also point to the other lot and indicate how many spots are available. We're trying to pair up the lots, I guess, so to speak. So we're trying to leverage that as much as possible, and by reducing the rates in the Dalhousie lot, we're hoping to draw more over, and whereas we're heavily utilized Byward Market, we want to draw some of that demand over to Dalhousie, sorry.
I think it's been very successful, the display boards and all that. I'm curious to the way the report was written in that context, because I understand the value of keeping the fees higher, if you will, at the Byward William lot, but the one further down, my understanding is that they're significantly lowered. Is that the case?
Through the chair, yes. Both the rates and the utilization are lower, so we're trying to find that balance to again, it's that convenience factor that I spoke to earlier. Yep. Trying to make it, find that price point at which people will walk that extra little bit.
Perfect. And then the second one is around the parking revenues. Like, what initiatives could we use in the alternative mode of transportation? Because when we see the programs that are attached to it in terms of parking, we have the bike parking component, the corrals, and the bike loops. But I'm seeing that the amounts are very low. What sort of other initiatives is the department working on so that we can focus on alternate modes of transportation and funding for that type of parking?
Through you, Chair. We are making sure that we comply with the Municipal Act in terms of the use of public funds generated through fees for parking. So recognizing that as an organization, the lead on alternative modes, planning and strategy is planning growth management. We try to collaborate with the other department on that purpose. We've focused on the ring and post mostly with some of this alternative mode spending. That spun out of the implementation of pay and display initially, where we wanted to make sure that that program did not result in any reduction of parking, bicycle parking for cyclists. So we want to make sure that we comply with that. We collaborate with Planning Growth Management in looking for new alternatives. We've funded the bike corrals, the on-street bike corrals. But really we take our lead in terms of new programs and so forth, that there are opportunities for that from Planning Growth Management staff.
I guess in my mind, part of the issue is that a lot of the BIAs have seen the success of Hintonburg and West Wellington on the corral portion of it, and right now there appears to be a confusion on who they request to, or is the department coming out and asking them where the corrals can go up. I know that, for example, Byward, beyond the central building, is looking to see bike corrals on Dalhousie. We'd love to see some on Beechwood, as we've heard Councillor Nussbaum and I know that some are speaking of Montreal Road and MacArthur. So I wonder what's the process, because what I see is that there's not as much money spent in proportion there, but there's not a clear process for BIAs or community associations to engage.
Through the chair, I think I'll turn it over to John Mosier. The intake process would be through PGM, and I know they did extend the pilot program into this year, so they are looking for candidate sites, I believe.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, certainly we are, and Planning Growth Management is the lead in this. Mr. Colley can tell you what we're doing and what our future plans are.
To the chair, we are continuing our pilot project for the corrals this coming year. We have 2 returning locations, and the third is still being finalized and should be announced shortly. But the project will continue for this year, and we will do an evaluation of the success of the project following this cycling season.
So what I'm hearing is, as suspected, there's a pilot project in place, but if there's a higher demand than what the pilot is, because what I'm hearing is that people are seeing the success of the current ones. They'd like to expand the program, but we're still in a pilot phase, so there's not a true way to apply for certain businesses, and that's causing a bit of angst. We're getting a lot of requests downtown for locations for bike corrals, either from community association, individual businesses, or BIAs, and to them there's still not a clear format. So I wonder if you'd be able to send a letter to BIAs reaffirming our engagement for the pilot, and if there's more demand than what we're seeing for the pilot, that we expand the budget to reflect that demand.
To Chair, I would assume that certainly we could do that sort of consultation with the BIAs. We have met with them through the parking consultation group, and so we have communicated with them through that, and we have had communication with them over the past 2 years about the project, but certainly we can reach out to them again.
Just beyond the BIA portion, quickly, on the markets management front, on Byward, we had kind of just like what you'd said, your typical community center, the loops, but I know that location would be ideal for a bike corral, because for tourists that are coming into the market, as we're trying to revitalize it, it'd be nice to have the colors that you have, the pink, the orange, right in that location. So I wonder if, as well as the BIAs, you can work with markets management on the matter.
Through the Chair, we have actually been in discussion with the market management group as well recently, and we'll continue discussing with them about opportunities for the pilot project.
What's the issue? Funding at this point?
Funding, it's more that we have assets already, and that we are continuing the pilot project with those to really determine success and location and look at how they're used through all-day periods. So that process needs to continue through the year, and then we can do a full review and analysis of how they did, which will also include looking at how we would receive an application process from community groups, whether those be community associations, business improvement associations, and such.
Maybe we could take that specific one offline with you, but really I think, I'd love if we could drive, the opportunity that our doors are open for that kind of business, because right now there's just, in my mind, still not a clear path to getting those corrals on our streets beyond the pilot.
Thank you. Seeing no further questions on item number 2 received. Number 3.
Very short.
Councillor Fleury.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll be very short. This one is just the local area parking study. I saw the locations that were identified. I know that there's been a change in executive director at the Vanier BIA, but my understanding is that there had been a request to do a local area parking study along Beechwood, and I wonder if you would consider it in your work plan for this year.
Through the Chair, we have identified Beechwood as a potential area for study. What we intended to do this year was do some monitoring both in Beechwood but also in Vanier for 2 different purposes. Recently in Vanier we've removed the paid parking, so we were going to go out and assess the outcomes there. And at the same time do some data collection along Beechwood to more so assess the extent of the issue so that we can properly prioritize it. We're pretty much exhausted this year as far as our studies. We're in Centertown and Wellington West this year, so it would be regardless it would be a 2016 study. So we have it on our radar, and we want to determine through some kind of initial data collection whether it should be there. So,
okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Any other questions on this? Yeah, Councillor Nussbaum.
Just to follow up, Chair, on that last point, it just might be useful just as a heads up that the transportation planning folks are doing a study of the transportation corridor that Councillor Fleury and I are involved with, and we're having a public meeting at the beginning of June. So it's just going to be important that we look as part of that at what the parking needs are. So I just would give you a heads up that that's something that we are exploring actively, and we suspect there will be required to be changes to the parking infrastructure along that as a result of the transportation study. Thanks. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay. Carried? Carried. Okay. That deals with the agenda. We have no in-camera items. Any notices of motion for subsequent meetings? Seeing none. Inquiries? Okay. Councillor Deans?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just read it. Concentrated sweeping is conducted in core neighbourhoods, which include the downtown core, Vanier, New Edinburgh, Sandy Hill, and Glebe. These neighbourhoods receive concentrated street sweeping as a result of continuous on-street parking, which prevents effective sweeping. On-street parking has become increasingly problematic in neighbourhoods outside of the identified concentrated areas, and residents have noticed that street sweeping crews are returning multiple times to clean the street. As street sweeping occurs 24 hours a day, multiple cleanings can be very disruptive to neighbourhood residents. Can staff please investigate the feasibility of expanding the concentrated street sweeping areas in order to reduce the occurrence of multiple cleanings on residential streets? Could staff also include a cost-benefit analysis of expanding the concentrated street sweeping areas versus crews making multiple passes on streets where parked cars have been problematic?
Okay, thank you. Councillor Fleury.
Mine was very similar to this. I'll read it just to make sure there might be a different angle to this. So during concentrated street sweeping operation, Public Works posts parking restrictions on certain streets and not on others. How does the department decide whether or not to post signage on one street and another for these operations? Furthermore, on the street where the regulations are posted, are the crews performing the street sweeping paired with parking enforcement officers? So it's semi-tied to what Councillor Dean, but I think it's a bit different. Thanks.
Any further inquiries? Okay, thank you. Under other business, Vice Chair McKenney has a motion that she would like dealt with today concerning the Right Bike Share program on road allowances. We would require 2/3 vote for waiver, and then we could deal with the motion. So perhaps you could introduce the motion, then we could vote on waiver.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. So this is essentially to allow Right Bike, which is a bike share program, enough time to install their bike racks in support of Bike to Work Month, which is right now in May, and it will essentially allow for waiver of encroachment on 6 spots in the downtown core. So that's why we're asking to walk it on today.
All right. So on waiver again, we need 2/3 the vote on waiver. Carried. On the motion itself. Carried. Thank you. Adjournment. Carried. I assume. And our next meeting is Wednesday, June the 3rd, 2015. I'll warn council members that we have or committee members that we have a very heavy agenda on the June 3rd meeting. So I can't tell you to, but I would ask you to please keep your day clear, because we could well be here after lunch and into the afternoon. Thank you.